All right, so lesson 54, but you can turn in your Bibles to 2 Kings chapter 4. We'll pick it up at the end there where we left off, and we'll meet a new character, a man from Syria, his name being Naaman. So we've seen in our last lesson the many miracles of Elisha. The first ones were more outward miracles. In our last lesson we saw the inward miracles of Elisha. Today we'll see how God works already in other nations, beginning to plant seeds for the future Gentiles who would be His. Okay? All right, let's begin with 2 Kings chapter 4, starting at verse 38. Okay? 2 Kings chapter 4. Look at verse 38. And Elisha came again to Gilgal, and there was a dearth in the land, so famine. And the sons of the prophets were sitting before him, and he said unto his servant, Set on the great pot, and seethe pottage for the sons of the prophets. And one went out into the field to gather herbs, and found a wild vine, and gathered thereof wild gourds, his lap full, and came and shred them into the pot of pottage, for they knew them not. So they poured out for the men to eat. And it came to pass, as they were eating of the pottage, that they cried out and said, O thou man of God, there is death in the pot. And they could not eat thereof. But he said, Then bring meal. And he cast it into the pot, and he said, Pour out for the people, that they may eat. And there was no harm in the pot. So another outward miracle, wonder happens here. Elisha going from place to place, he stops in Gilgal. At a school that, again, it looks like prophets, and he's gathered here with this young man teaching and probably telling of the many things that he's seen and heard and what's going on in the land. And the men gathered together were often poor. They would eat a simple shared meal, a large cauldron or pot set up on a fire. And they would bring in various things that they knew, probably had seen their mothers and their fathers collect and put into this big bowl, this cauldron, to make what they called a pottage or a poor man's soup. Okay? Well, one of these men collected wild gourds in a vine, and he took them to the pot. He shred them up into it, so cut them up to put them into it so they would boil and make a nice meal. And they took that cauldron then after the proper time had passed, and they began to fill up bowls and cups and passed it around so that the men could eat. And while they were eating, one man noticed that there was a bitter taste probably in the soup. And looking into it, maybe noticed a vegetable or something in the soup that he knew was not good, was poisonous. And so he called out, Death in this pot, so that all the men knew that they should not eat it, because it would not be good for them. So here is an opportunity God has prepared for Elisha to be able to perform an outward miracle for these men to see and know that first of all, God is working in Elisha. For Elisha to know that God is using him, and to know that God is in control of all things. So Elisha calls for some flour, some meal, some grain, and took that meal, wonder of God, poured it into the soup, stirred it around probably, and that soup was once again made wholesome and safe for the prophets to eat. In and of itself, would this make it safe? Not necessarily. But it was the Lord's working here that He made it. Through that picture, He made it safe to eat. So, that's one thing that happened. Now, the last few verses of this chapter point out another thing that happened. So let's take a look at that before we get to Naaman. Verses 42 through 44 of 2 Kings chapter 4. And there came a man from Baal Sheisha, and brought the man of God bread of the firstfruits, 20 loaves of barley, and full ears of corn in the husk thereof. And he said, Give unto the people, that they may eat. And his servitor said, What? Should I set this before 100 men? He said again, Give the people, that they may eat. For thus saith the Lord, They shall eat, and shall live thereof. So he set it before them, and they did eat, and left thereof according to the word of the Lord. So this other man comes to Elisha. Okay? The reason that he comes is this man comes following the Old Testament laws of bringing the first fruits, okay, to the priests and the Levites. But the problem was they're in Israel. There's no temple. There's no priests or Levites to bring the first fruits to. This godly man brings it to Elisha then, giving him and the prophets the gift of the first fruits so that they are blessed because, again, they are dependent totally upon others to get their food. They don't have their own farms. Their focus is on preaching and teaching. Well, Elisha instructed his servant, here, take this food and feed these 100 men. Now the servant, very much like the disciples in the New Testament with Christ, object, well, there's not enough here for 100 people. Come on, Elisha, don't be silly. There's just a little corn here, a little bread. How could this possibly feed him? But it didn't matter. Elisha told him, insisted, go on, do the work, feed them. Elisha himself couldn't multiply the loaves. He couldn't do a wonder, but God could. And that's what happened. All of the men ate, and there were still leftovers. An Old Testament example of the New Testament miracles that Christ will be doing. Okay? So God did that, and on your worksheets you would have had to do some comparing there of these two things. Now let's go on to Naaman, though. Let's meet Naaman. Okay? Chapter 5, verse 1. Now Naaman, captain of the host of the king of Syria, was a great man with his master, and honorable, because by him the Lord had given deliverance unto Syria. He was also a mighty man of valor, but he was a leper. And the Syrians had gone out by companies, and had brought away captive out of the land of Israel a little maid. And she waited on Naaman's wife. And she said unto her mistress, Would God my Lord were with the prophet that is in Samaria, for he would recover him of his leprosy. And one went in and told his Lord, saying, Thus and thus said the maid that is of the land of Israel. And the king of Syria said, Go, and I will send a letter unto the king of Israel. And he departed and took with him 10 talents of silver, 6,000 pieces of gold, 10 changes of raiment. And he brought the letter to the king of Israel, saying, Now when this letter is come unto thee, behold, I have therewith sent Naaman my servant to thee, that thou mayest recover him of his leprosy. And it came to pass, when the king of Israel had read the letter, and he had rent his clothes, said, Am I God to kill and to make alive, that this man doth send unto me to recover a man of his leprosy? Wherefore consider, I pray you, and see how he seeketh a quarrel against me. And it was so, when Elisha the man of God had heard that the king of Israel had rent his clothes, that he sent to the king, saying, Wherefore hast thou rent thy clothes? Let him now come to me, and he shall know that there is a prophet in Israel. So we need to understand a little bit of the background. Naaman, an important captain for King Ben-Hadad of Syria, is also diseased with leprosy. But in God's providence, when the Syrians had attacked and raided into the land of Israel, they took back certain individuals to become their servants. And one was this godly young girl. Brought up, we can be sure, in a godly household, properly taught by her parents the stories. And here she is in this heathen land, this little shining light of God. What does she do there? Well, she speaks to Naaman's wife, because she is the servant of Naaman's wife. That's who she serves. And she says, Oh, to my God, would if only we were in the land of Israel, then we could send your husband to Naaman, or to Elisha. He would be able to call upon the Lord to be able to heal your husband of this dreaded disease of leprosy. She's a great witness, and God has used her here in this wicked land. Well, Naaman, probably hearing about this from his wife, I'm sure goes to the king, and he asks the king permission. King, I've got a young Israelitish girl in my home. She's spoken of a great prophet down in the land of Israel named Elisha. Give me permission to go down that land, for she says that this man of God, this Elisha, would be able to heal me. Let me go, master. And so the king says, I will let you do that. The king cares for his servant Naaman. He wants him probably to be able to win more battles. So he says, go, here, I'll give you this letter that introduces you to the king. So Naaman packs up. But he knows what he's about to ask for. If he were to be asking of an ungodly, a wicked, a false prophet, this type of request would require a heap of money. A large sum of money. So he brings with him a large, extravagant set of gifts, gold and silver and clothing. And he packs it all up. And he takes the long journey down into the land of Israel. And there he goes before the king and says, and delivers to the king his letter. Of course, the king would have known we've got a visitor from Syria. It's the king's right-hand man, Naaman. Let us find out what he is. And he delivers the letter, and the king reads it. And the king is put out. What? This king of Syria expects me to be able to call upon God to heal this man? Oh, I see what's going on here. The minute I tell him, no, I can't do that, and send Naaman back to the king of Syria, he's going to say, there's a reason to fight. The king of Israel won't help me, so I shall attack him. So the king of Israel is afraid. He says, the only reason he's doing this is he knows I can't heal this man, and he's doing it to pick a fight so that he can go to battle with me. That's exactly what he says. He says, am I God? He jumped to the wrong conclusion, and he rips off his clothes. Well, when he rips off his clothes, that is a very serious sign. And word spreads quickly through the land that the king, even the king, has rent his clothes. And word gets to Elisha, and Elisha probably goes, oh boy, what's going on now? What has the Lord done now? What is the Lord working? And maybe he prays to God and speaks to God, and somehow we don't know exactly how he finds out, but he finds out, maybe through speaking to the Lord, maybe through a messenger, that this man, Naaman the leper, has come to Israel seeking to be healed. And so Elisha tells the king, send him to me. I'll take care of this. This is something of the Lord. So let's see what the result is. Verse 9. So Naaman came with his horses and with his chariot and stood at the door of the house of Elisha. And Elisha sent a messenger unto him, saying, go and wash in Jordan 7 times, and thy flesh shall come again to thee, and thou shalt be clean. But Naaman was wroth, and went away, and said, behold, I thought he will surely come out to me, and stand, and call on the name of the Lord his God, and strike his hand over the place, and recover the leper. Are not Abana and Pharpar, rivers of Damascus, better than all the waters of Israel? May I not wash in them and be clean? So he turned and went away in a rage. And the servants came near and spake at him and said, my father, if the prophet had bid thee do some great thing, wouldest thou not have done it? How much rather than when he saith to thee, wash and be clean? Naaman, in all his importance, in all of his pomp and circumstance, in all of his riches and wealth, shows up at the house of Elijah. And there he waits, thinking himself an important man. What Elijah was doing, we don't know. But we can see him almost being, in this instance, hermitish. Packed away in the corner of his house, scribbling down notes or writing things out. And it's as though he doesn't have the time of day for Naaman. But the Lord will heal him. So he tells the servant to Gehazi, just go talk to him. Go out the door. I'm not going to bother with him. Go out the door and talk to him. Tell him that this is what he's got to do and he'll be healed. Elijah doesn't even go out of the house. It's as though he's busy. He's trying to teach Naaman here a lesson. It's not about how important you are. It's not about how much you have that determines whether God will heal you. Just listen and obey. Obedience is how one is saved by the Lord. And so, he's told, go wash in the Jordan River. Well, Naaman's put out. What? He won't even come to the door to greet me, to look upon me, to see me, to talk to me? What? I've got to go down in that filthy, muddy water, the Jordan? Aren't there better rivers in Syria for me to go wash in? Clean, royal waters? Turns away in a fit of rage and begins to leave, still plagued with his leprosy. And his servants, having come all this way and being wise, see the master is only being caught up in his emotions. And, Master, please think about this. If he had told you to do some great thing, wouldn't you have done it to be healed? Here's a little small thing to do. Master, why don't you do this small thing? Well, how does the master react? Verse 14. Then went he down and dipped himself 7 times in Jordan, according to the saying of the man of God, and his flesh came again like unto the flesh of a little child, and he was clean. And he returned to the man of God, he and all his company, and came and stood before him and said, Behold, now I know that there is no God in all the earth but in Israel. Now therefore I pray thee, take a blessing of thy servant. But he said, As the Lord liveth, before whom I stand, I will receive none. And he urged him to take it, but he refused. And Naaman said, Shall there not be then, I pray thee, be given to thy servant 2 mules, burden of the earth? For thy servant will henceforth offer neither burnt offering nor sacrifice unto other gods, but unto the Lord. In this thing the Lord pardon thy servant, that when my master goeth into the house of Rimmon to worship there, and he boweth, and he leaneth on my hand, and I bow myself in the house of Rimmon, when I bow myself in the house of Rimmon, the Lord pardon thy servant the same. And he said unto him, Go in peace. So he departed from him a little way. Well, Naaman finally gives in. Naaman obeys Elisha. He goes to the Jordan. He dips in it 7 times. Again, that number of friendship and fellowship, the number of the covenant. So Naaman had gone here angry, but when he comes back, he's been filled with a godly faith. God has softened and worked in Naaman's heart so that he sees how the Lord is working here. Okay? Sees how God is working. Not because he thought he could worship Jehovah only on Israel's soil, but God has also worked in his soul. He now knows Jehovah is God, and he confesses that to Elisha. He confesses, There is no God but the true God of heaven and earth who did this to me. But now Naaman has a concern, because he's about to go back to the land of Syria where there are only false gods. And he is required to go with his master into the house of his master's God. No, you can worship God anywhere, Elisha tells him. You don't have to just come here to Israel. You can worship God in your land. Okay? So he asked him, he said, Please forgive me if I am called by my master to escort him into the palace, into the temple of his God. Please forgive me if I do so. And Elisha excuses him, tells him, Go in peace. Don't worry. And so that is what Naaman does. This is a small seed that is being planted already in a Gentile land. Small Gentile land. Eventually God will call some of his people out of the Syrians. But he already has there a small little girl who is a faithful witness. Naaman goes home, and you could only imagine him teaching his wife and his children the ways of the Lord, and starting a small little group of godly people there in Syria. Maybe he would tell the king even. Well, the king would listen or not is a whole different thing. But God is already at work here. And so these Gentiles, not Jewish people, but Gentiles in Syria, would have a good witness there.